We got company.
Broadsword calling Danny Boy.
You have my sympathies.
We do not follow maps to buried treasure, and X never, ever marks the spot.
I'm glad it's you.
Well, I understand double O's have a very short life expectancy, so your mistake will be short-lived.
Would you like some refreshments?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank
Enjoy the show.
Hi there, welcome to Sitting Through the Credits, a film review podcast covering new releases, cult classics, and everything in between. My name is Matt, and for this 9th episode, I'll be covering the 1999 science fiction horror film Deep Blue Sea.
Because that's what an 8,000-pound Mako thinks about. About freedom. About the Deep Blue Sea.
Deep Blue Sea was directed by the Finnish director Renny Harlin from a script credited to Duncan Kennedy, Donna and Wayne Powers. The film is focused upon Aquatica, an underwater Alzheimer's research facility whose Mako shark test subjects break loose, forcing the crew into a battle for survival as they try to escape back up to the surface. We all know the film that every shark movie is compared to by default. Unsurprisingly, the 1975 film Jaws was one of my gateway horror movies as I was growing up. Steven Spielberg's classic is probably the reason why I am so fond of shark films, even though the vast majority of them fall short when they are inevitably compared to it.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
It was at a similar time to first watching Jaws that I had my first exposure to Deep Blue Sea, when I was queuing outside my local cinema, the Majestic in Scunthorpe, which has since been demolished. The poster, showing one of the mechanical sharks turning, as if to devour a swimming Saffron Burrows, was an image that stuck with me, and though I was too young to see it in theatres at the time, it would not be long before I get the chance to view it on television. I need to say up front that you won't catch me declaring Deep Blue Sea to be a hidden gem or an underappreciated classic in this review. That being said, despite its flaws, I've always had a lot of fun watching it. It is the sort of movie that, when I'd encounter it whilst channel hopping, I would always have to stop browsing and watch, at least until its next climactic set piece. The story of Deep Blue Sea was initially written as a spec script by the Australian screenwriter Duncan Kennedy, inspired by childhood memories of a shark attack near his home in Queensland. The script was bought by Warner Brothers in 1994, but it would remain undeveloped for the next 2 years. Numerous uncredited writers worked on different drafts of the script, including Simon Barry, Michael Frost Beckner, Charlie Mitchell, and Carty Torkington. Deep Blue Sea's producer, Akiva Goldsman, also contributed to and refined the script. Once Renny Harlin became attached as the director, the movie essentially became what Donna and Wayne Powers had written. Their changes pushed the film away from the high-tech military espionage and action film of the previous drafts, which would have made the film similar in tone to 1998's Deep Rising. Donna and Wayne instead wanted to focus more upon blue-collar workers, restricting the ability of the humans to fight back against the genetically engineered sharks. Renny Harlin has a varied filmography, some of his most famous directorial work including 1988's A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, 1990's Die Hard 2, and 1995's Cutthroat Island. Cutthroat Island became one of the biggest box office bombs of all time, with a loss of approximately $105 million, so at the time Deep Blue Sea floated towards him, Renny was seeking commercially viable projects that would help redeem his reputation. Deep Blue Sea was primarily shot at Fox Baja Studios, near the resort community of Rosarito in Baja, California. The studio was a $20 million development that was built on behalf of 20th Century Fox in 1996 for the filming of 1997's Titanic. Located on 35 acres overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the studio is most famous for its large water tanks which have a combined volume of 20 million gallons. Its filtration plant capable of delivering 9,000 gallons of seawater per minute. The water tanks have been used by various studios for productions including Tomorrow Never Dies, Pearl Harbor, and Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. With a budget of approximately $82 million and a crew of around 300, the majority of the film was shot between August and November 1998. Further footage of the film's miniatures was shot at Grant McCune Designs in Los Angeles as late as January 1999. Deep Blue Sea has a tightly focused cast, as the research station's day shift crew, including Renny Harlin in a director cameo, exits the film's plot early. We are subsequently left with 8 characters who are left to brave the lurking aquatic menace. Leading Aquatica's Alzheimer's research team is Dr. Susan McAllister, played by Saffron Burrows.
What we're attempting to achieve here has never been done. We're this close to the reactivation of a human brain cell.
Aquatica's shark wrangler, on parole, the film's reluctant anti-hero Carter Blake, is played by Thomas Jane.
Look, I got a workable deal here. I don't make waves. I meet the terms of my parole. I'm not out to change the world like the doc. And I'm not out to wreck it either.
The film's biggest star, Samuel L. Jackson, plays the role of Russell Franklin, the president of Chimera Pharmaceuticals, the organisation funding the facility's Alzheimer's research.
Where's Tattoo? You know, short guy. The plane, boss, the plane!
Right.
I am getting old.
Assisting Dr. McAllister is the scientist Dr. Jim Whitlock, played by Stellan Skarsgård.
She'll be ready by tomorrow night.
But
We will not be ready. We're 2 months ahead of schedule. We're skipping 3 rounds of preliminary trials.
no choice.
Aquatica's lead engineer, Tom Scoggins, known as Scoggs, is played by Michael Rappaport.
Who are you gonna trust? Me. That's who. You trust me. You know why? Because I'm trustworthy.
The marine biologist and Dr. Whitlock's partner, Janice Higgins, is played by Jacqueline McKenzie. Aquatica's cook, Sherman Dudley, also known as Preacher, is played by the American rapper turned actor LL Cool J.
Okay. But this is a lesson about the drinking. Let's just say I've learned it. No need to get all carried away. Showing me your vengeful side. I know your wrath, Lord.
And finally, Brenda Kearns, the facility's radio operator, is played by Ada Turturro.
Hey, Ben, I'm picking up a nasty little bitch of a squall about 30 miles out. Over.
Copy that. We'll be all right.
Early on in his acting career, Thomas Jane's performance in Deep Blue Sea would prove to be a breakthrough role. In spite of a professed fear of sharks, he would return to face a similar menace once again in 2016's USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage. In that instance, he was playing the role of the real-life pilot, Lieutenant Commander Robert Adrian Marks, who rescued 56 sailors from shark-infested waters when that vessel was torpedoed in 1945. Samuel L. Jackson was one of the first actors cast for the film, Renny Harlin and he having struck up a good relationship when working together on the first of their 3 collaborations, The Long Kiss Goodnight in 1996. Initially, Sam was set to play the film's chef, however his agents disapproved of this role, so the character of CEO Russell Franklin was written specifically for him. One of the other major reasons Sam was pleased to take the role was that the shooting schedule allowed him plenty of time to visit the nearby golf courses. As the water tanks at Fox Baja were so large that they technically counted as open water, this also gave his daughter the opportunity to become certified as a diver whilst he was filming. Now, I have to admit that rap is not a genre of music that appeals to me, so I have to ask, are deeper, bluer, My Hat Is Like a Shark's Fin considered to be good lyrics? They've continued to give me a good laugh over all these years at least. In addition to performing 2 of the film's songs, LL also served as the film's music supervisor. Putting late 90s music to one side, however, LL Cool J is a lot of fun to watch in this role, much as he was when he played Ronnie in 1998's Halloween H2O, the Halloween franchise's 20th anniversary film. In spite of both roles possessing a comic relief element, LL Cool J gives one of the strongest performances in both films. Although certainly the writing lacks nuance, Preacher's religious past is an important connection to Deep Blue Sea's overall themes. Having to balance faith and comedy alongside his action-focused sequences, all without diminishing the gravitas of the situation, is a tall order for any actor, but he acquits himself admirably. The flooded kitchen sequence remains one of the film's highlights. Despite, on the face of it, playing a character rejected by Samuel L. Jackson, the chef role substantially changed once LL was playing the part. Renny Harlin was impressed by his commitment, leading to subtle script changes such as acknowledging a good relationship between Preacher and Skoggs, and major script changes such as Preacher surviving the movie and being the one to finally defeat the last and largest shark.
Carter! Hey! Bring me some sushi!
One of the key reasons that Deep Blue Sea has long fascinated me is the hybrid approach that was used to achieve its visual effects. On the practical side, the film's standout achievement is obviously the sharks themselves. Where Jaws consciously focused on hiding the practical shark model as much as possible, the team working on Deep Blue Sea wanted to show their animatronic sharks as much as possible, and with good reason. 25 years on from its release, the film's animatronic sharks still look remarkable. 4.5 animatronic sharks were constructed for the production. 3 of these animatronics were designed to play the 15-foot-long Gen 1 Mako sharks and the tiger shark. The largest of the animatronics, playing the Gen 2 shark, reportedly weighed 8,000 pounds and was powered by a 1,000 horsepower engine. Unlike the shark props used for Jaws, Deep Blue Sea's animatronic creatures were capable of swimming independently, without the need for external wires or apparatus, and could reach a speed of up to 30 miles per hour. According to Duncan Kennedy, in an interview for the Los Angeles Times, so determined were the team to one-up Bruce, the practical shark from Jaws, that they ensured that Deep Blue Sea's largest shark was 26 feet long, exactly 1 foot longer than the classic shark prop from Spielberg's film. The sharks featured computer-controlled animatronics and technology derived from the aerospace industry, and were created in 8 months under the supervision of shark effects supervisor Walt Conti. Walt's storied career and specialist work with creature effects has seen him and his company, Edge Innovations, responsible for realising numerous on-screen animals in the film industry. Most notable among these are the orca from Free Willy and the titular snake in Anaconda. Edge Innovations' animatronic orca was the first full-scale, self-propelled, free-floating robotic whale, whilst their Anaconda remains the most complex, serially linked robot ever devised. Deep Blue Sea wouldn't see the end of Walt Conti's Shark FX work, however. Building on the technology devised for this film, Edge Innovations have provided animatronic sharks for various film productions. These include the practical hammerhead and great white sharks for the 2011 film Shark Night 3D, and the historically inaccurate great white sharks for the previously mentioned USS Indianapolis Men of Courage. Shark Night 3D is particularly interesting as its opening and closing credits feature B-roll footage of the animatronic Mako shark from Deep Blue Sea. Edge Innovations have provided sharks for some more surprising productions as well, including Dobie the Shark in 2013's Anchorman 2, and they also fulfilled Dr. Evil's dream of sharks with laser beams attached to their heads in the 2002 film Austin Powers in Goldmember.
Are those sharks with laser beams attached to their heads? Cool!
The team also worked on a Wolfgang Peterson-directed film from 2000, The Perfect Storm. Their work on the shark and marlin effects for that film earned Walt Conti a nomination for Best Visual Effects at the 73rd Academy Awards in 2001, along with Stefan Fangmeier, John Frazier, and Habib Zagapur. Ultimately, they missed out on this award to Gladiator. Remaining on an aquatic theme, it would be remiss of me not to mention Walt and Edge Innovations' work with the director and deep-sea explorer James Cameron, which extended beyond the realm of special effects. Cameron enlisted Edge Innovations to take on the design and creation of the lower pod section of the Deep-Sea Challenger submersible. In this submersible, on March 26, 2012, Cameron made the first solo dive to the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, spending 3 hours exploring the deepest point in the Pacific Ocean. One of the less obvious practical elements of Deep Blue Sea is the film's miniature work. Grant McCune Design was responsible for building miniatures of the underwater exterior of Aquatica, as well as its shark cages, passages, interior elevator shaft, and a rescue helicopter. Rather than film the miniatures underwater, shots in which they were featured were achieved using smoke, digital bubbles being added later in post-production. The large underwater Aquatica habitat miniature was built with sections that were deliberately designed to flex. The miniature was set up on the 5,000 square foot GMD motion control and smoke stage in Los Angeles. Using a vertical track assembly and a stepper motor synced with the cameras, the collapse of the structure could be repeated as many times as necessary. In order to replicate the facility's collapsing supports, a brittle plaster material called pyrocell was used, which, when compressed, would blow outwards, the use of high-speed cameras making their destruction appear more realistic. On the computer-generated side of Deep Blue Sea's FX, a number of digital FX studios were employed, including Cinesight, Flash Filmworks, Hammerhead Productions, and Industrial Light and Magic. The 18-person team from Flash Filmworks were primarily responsible for creating the film's storm sequence. In order to achieve this, a 3D model of Aquatica was employed for many shots, with the surrounding ocean rendered digitally with 3D waves before rain and wave elements were composited in. Flash Filmworks used the same software, Arete RenderWorld, which had created the calm digital water for the 1995 film Waterworld. For Deep Blue Sea, the team worked with the software developers to add additional variables, including wind speed and wave height. To create crashing and splashing water, authentic wave footage was shot on the California coast. Flash Film Studios would then isolate water turbulence and overlay this footage on top of the computer-generated waves at points of impact. The backyard belonging to the brother of John Mazer, the team's co-visual effects supervisor, was turned into a weather studio for a week. Sprinklers were sprayed down in front of a black background to replicate different types of rain required for various shots. Walls and floors matching sections of the set were constructed so that once doused with water, footage could be captured ready to be composited into scenes requiring digital weather effects. In some instances, digital 3D extensions were added to plates of the full-size sets, with camera crew and equipment that were in the shot digitally removed. The 3D digital model of the station was created using Lightwave, however the sky in many of these FX-heavy scenes was a matte painting. One of the film's most impressive set pieces is its explosive helicopter crash. In order to achieve this, a carcass of a Bell 205 Huey helicopter, lacking rotor blades, was filmed on wires and composited into a background plate of the set which featured pyrotechnic effects. Water, rain, waves, debris, and the helicopter's spinning and shredding rotor blades were then added digitally by Flash Filmworks in post-production. A similar approach was taken with the digital shark scenes. One scene where a Gen 1 shark enters the facility via a hole that has been blasted in the structure is a very convincing digital effect, achieved by the team compositing in a digital 3D shark model. These digital sharks were built to specification by Viewpoint Data Labs and then animated by Hammerhead Productions using custom controls to replicate shark behaviour, such as swimming and teeth baring. The digital sharks were then rendered and shaded using textures painted in Photoshop before they could be composited into background plate photography. For scenes where the digital sharks were underwater, fog was applied as a depth filter, and blood, bubbles, particles, shadows, and caustics were added where necessary. One thing that I have to address is a claim that I have seen spread around the internet in multiple articles and reviews, and even from Renny Harlin himself, a claim that desperately needs clarifying once and for all. Are there any real sharks in Deep Blue Sea? Now, I love shark movies, and I have seen Deep Blue Sea a lot. In truth, far more than I should probably admit to. I might be watching it right now. The behind-the-scenes documentary made available with the film's physical releases clearly shows the crew at sea in the Bahamas with Stuart Cove's diving company. Stuart Cove's has a long history with theatrical diving work, the long list of films including several Bond movies such as For Your Eyes Only, with further films including Open Water, Flipper and Jaws the Revenge. So why doubt the claim? Because the behind-the-scenes footage clearly shows that they were filming with Caribbean reef sharks, none of which appear in the film. Perhaps it was later decided to leave all of this footage on the cutting room floor, but it can be categorically stated that there are no real sharks present in the cut of Deep Blue Sea that was released to audiences. The cynic in me thinks that Renny and his crew managed to sneak a holiday out of Warner Brothers. Deep Blue Sea's score was composed by Trevor Rabin, the former guitarist of the English prog rock band Yes. Although it has been argued that the score is stereotypical of its time, the emphasis on choral and orchestral elements amidst electronically rendered sounds gives it enough character to differentiate it from its contemporaries. I am particularly a fan of the action-packed track titled Anarchy with its electric guitar, which Rabin would later echo in his score for 2004's National Treasure. This action music also contrasts nicely with Trevor's earlier use of piano to create an ominous, threatening sound for the sharks. Although the music does pay tribute to the Jaws score, particularly in its opening titles, on the whole the soundtrack manages to avoid overusing John Williams' most famous musical motif. Despite that having become the default sound for shark films. Trevor Rabin's score is certainly one which encapsulates Deep Blue Sea's characteristic blend of action, horror and science fiction. Deep Blue Sea opens with a scene straight out of the slasher film playbook, with a group of boat-bound, partying teens being hunted by an unseen assailant. The introduction, though cliché, makes for an effective opening to the film, particularly as all of the shots featuring the shark here were achieved with animatronics rather than CGI. In spite of the horror, the film's sense of fun is clear to see. The camera alone is enough to tell us that there is a shark lurking below, but it isn't blood, but blood-red, red wine that attracts it to the unwary adolescents. We are briefly introduced to Carter, who saves the teens before being whisked off to a helicopter making a rooftop landing amidst the Los Angeles skyline. This is one of the film's most subtly effective digital effects, as in reality, the helicopter is landing by the edge of a water tank in Mexico, and the Los Angeles backdrop has been composited in. It is here that we are introduced to Saffron Burrows as Dr. Susan McAllister and Samuel L. Jackson as Russell Franklin. An interesting element of Franklin's introduction is that it features a brief, uncredited appearance by Ronny Cox, who is most recognisable for playing the roles of Dick Jones in RoboCop and Cohagen in Total Recall. The intention is clearly playing on the stereotypical expectation that the white-haired old man in the suit behind the desk will be the CEO, rather than the sole black character in the scene. However, nothing is really done with this expectation subversion. Ronny isn't even given any lines. Close-up shots of the seaplane Susan and Russell used to reach Aquatica were achieved by suspending the aircraft on a crane with a running engine. According to Renny Harlin, the seaplane used in the film is the same de Havilland DHC-2 Beaver that was used in the 1998 Harrison Ford and Anne Heche film 6 Days, 7 Nights. It has also been claimed that the aircraft from that 1998 film was the same that was used in the 1997 film The Edge. Now, I've gone on a bit of a journey trying to find out if this claim is true. In all three films, the aircraft sports a different fictional registration number and colour scheme, not an unusual occurrence in Hollywood. 6 Days, 7 Nights used at least 2 de Havilland Beavers. One of these was the aircraft which was wrecked in the film's island plane crash, and it was subsequently left on a scrap heap near Denver, Colorado. That plane has since been restored to an airworthy condition as N67DN, but at the time of the filming of Deep Blue Sea, it would have been out of action. The other plane, CGHAF, has a more tragic history, crashing shortly after taking off from Penticton Airport in British Columbia, Canada, claiming the lives of its 3 occupants in August 2003. The Beaver used in Deep Blue Sea, identified by the same registration number from the film, N76RZ, was on display inside the passenger terminal at Calgary International Airport in 2006. With this information, and the fact that the 6 Days 7 Nights aircraft was missing the horizontal stabiliser present on the Deep Blue Sea plane, it appears that Renny Harlin's claim is incorrect. Upon arriving at the facility, Franklin's line to
"Treat me like a tourist"
is of course a means to easily deliver exposition to the audience. Meanwhile, Jan's line,
"Welcome to Aquatica,"
is very similar to a famous film which preceded Deep Blue Sea by 6 years.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Just a coincidence, it also has a tropical storm striking an isolated facility whilst it's only being manned by a skeleton crew on an important day for its future operation. It features genetics research, the theme of human beings attempting to play God, and Samuel L. Jackson.
Hold on to your butts.
As Franklin tours the facility, an escape submarine can be seen prominently suspended in the wet entry set. This is the same mini-submarine that was used in the 1998 film The Sphere, starring Dustin Hoffman, Sharon Stone, and Samuel L. Jackson. One cast member I haven't mentioned yet is Preacher's ill-mannered parrot, the imaginatively named Bird.
You got a big fat butt.
You know what, Bird? You were trying my last nerve. Don't make me drown your feathery ass. Get myself a cat.
Bird was voiced by two prolific voice actors, the uncredited Mary Kay Bergman providing Bird's voice, whilst Frank Welker provided the squawking sounds. As the production was mindful of its budget, the decision was taken not to invest in a Hollywood-trained parrot, which have their own professional trainers. Instead, two local Mexican birds were used, one specialised in flight scenes and the other trained to sit in specific locations. Certain sequences, such as the parrot flying away from approaching floodwaters and also the parrot's untimely fate, were achieved digitally. At this point of the film, we are firmly locked in exposition mode, with a party scene providing further character interaction and a captured tiger shark being fed to the test makos.
Tiger shark.
A what?
The film features 3 test sharks, the large Gen 2 shark being the offspring of its 2 smaller Gen 1 parents. As gene therapies were used to increase the shark's brain mass by 5 times, we are clearly in the realm of science fiction. Although a 25-foot animatronic is used for the Gen 2 shark, it is later stated that it is 45 feet in length. For context, in reality, mako sharks are known to grow up to 12 feet long. A 45-foot shark is comparable to the size of a megalodon, but that's a different shark franchise.
It's Megalodon.
The wet lab, where the caught Gen 2 shark is positioned, in order to extract the protein complex from its brain, is one of the film's most impressive sets. This set was built above the deep water tank located on stage 2, which was 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 29 feet deep. This stage was fitted with a hydraulic lifting system so that the set could be submerged in the seawater-filled tank below to replicate flooding. The film's outtime cure actually proves to be a success, immediately raising the film's stakes and providing extra motivation for Susan in particular.
What in God's creation?
Oh, not his. Ours.
Shortly after this success, however, the seemingly immobile Gen 2 shark severs Jim Whitlock's right arm, as you can see from this podcast episode's thumbnail. This impressive scene was achieved wholly by animatronics, with the shark programmed to move its head to one side, grab the dummy arm and rip it off and away from the stunt actor in one fluid motion. In a film full of memorable moments, this is clearly one the crew were proud of, as is evident from the use of slow motion. As it is also essentially a smoking kills joke, that serves to make the sequence even more darkly comic. Once the Gen 2 shark has snacked on Jim's arm and been saved from Carter's shotgun by a protective Susan, the film is kicked into high gear. For a film most criticised for its digital elements, Deep Blue Sea remains a very physical film, a fact that is very evident during the storm sequence as the crew battle to winch Jim to safety by helicopter. The actors were bombarded by water from rain bars and wave makers, and the finished film even includes an on-set accident that occurred during filming. Once the group have hooked Jim's gurney to the rescue helicopter's winch, they retreat to the facility's entrance doors. During this, the actors were unintentionally knocked off their feet by a large wave and washed into a group of cargo containers, fortunately without injury. Regardless of their increased brain power, the sharks get very lucky when the helicopter's winch fails, giving them the opportunity to drag the helicopter into an explosive collision with Brenda's control tower. The destruction of the exterior surface set was the final sequence of the film to be shot, as the full-sized sets were blown up for real to save on the extra cost of miniatures. Having lost his arm, lost his cigarettes, been dropped into the sea from a helicopter, and then being pulled through the ocean by a shark dragging said helicopter, the worst day at work continues for Stellan Skarsgård when he is weaponised by the sharks and hurled at the wet lab's underwater observation window.
Somebody, please, tell me what that is. Please.
The flooding sequence which follows is particularly effective. In order to achieve the film's window implosion scene, miniature effects were used in combination with the flooding of the full-scale set. Behind a miniature of the wet lab, a large black tank was used, with one of the tank's walls replaced by a frame holding a 1-inch thick pane of glass. A detonator was placed between the suspended miniature of Jim Whitlock bound to a gurney and the window. This explosive then shattered the glass, flooding the foreground miniature set. The scene then cuts from the miniature shot to the full-size set descending into the water tank below via hydraulics, whilst water was also pumped in from above. This sequence was shot over a few days as it was necessary to depict the room in different states of flooding. For scenes where the actors were required to seal doors to prevent the flood waters from advancing further, fire hoses were employed from the other side of the doors to provide resistance, aiding the believability of the actors' performances. The corridor set, which Preacher explores before it begins to flood, was built on stage 3. This set was deliberately constructed to be wide enough for the 15-foot practical Gen 1 sharks to roam Aquatica's corridors. An unforeseen issue which was encountered with the film's set design was that many of the floors were made of linoleum. The surface would therefore become extremely slippery for the running actors as the sets began to fill with water. Throughout the film, LL Cool J's performance as Preacher was a balance between scripted lines and improvisation. Having somehow managed to outrun a shark in water, Preacher reaches the apparent safety of his own, now flooded kitchen, where he amusingly grabs a frying pan to defend himself. The memorable scene where he seals himself inside an oven to escape one of the relentless Gen 1 sharks was shot in 2 to 3 days. The kitchen set was built on one of the sound stages, where, once flooded, the water could be 6 feet deep. The set also featured a deeper section which made it easier to operate the animatronic shark. The kitchen's removable floor sections to make the set deeper can actually be spotted earlier in the film when Preacher is cooking the cake for Susan's party. Does the shark switch the gas oven on accidentally or on purpose?
Is it happening?
Whichever the case may be, it's moments like this, where the tension is interrupted by humour, that allow Deep Blue Sea to express its sense of fun. Avenging his bird, Preacher vanquishes the first of the 3 sharks by hurling his lighter into the gas-filled room.
You ate my bird.
At this point of the film, the other 5 survivors have reached the wet entry, finding that the mini-sub has been knocked out of action. Samuel L. Jackson's character, Russell Franklin, is clearly the film's most well-developed character, his backstory being alluded to throughout the film before he delivers the true story to the rest of the survivors in a motivational speech.
When the avalanche came, it took us a week to climb out. And somewhere, we lost hope. Now, I don't know exactly when we turned on each other. I just know that 7 of us survived the slide, and only 5 made it out.
It is mentioned in various conversations that Franklin had been involved in an avalanche whilst mountain climbing. The speech he gives implies that in order to survive, he and the rest of the slide survivors had to resort to the murder and perhaps even cannibalism of 2 of their party in order to survive their ordeal. This backstory can even be seen physically, as there is prosthetically applied frostbite damage on the tips of Samuel L. Jackson's ears. Not only is Sam the film's biggest star, but traditional story conventions make it easy to believe that he will become the story's heroic figure. This is especially the case once his dark secret has been revealed, setting the stage for a redemptive character arc. Despite being an executive, he's clearly not afraid to get his feet wet and take the leadership role. His past experience demonstrating his strong survival instincts and familiarity with high-pressure situations. Instead, we are treated to one of the most memorable jump scares that I remember from the films I watched in my youth.
We're going to pull together and we're going to find a way to get out of here. First, we're going to seal off this scene.
For this death scene, Renny Harlin was inspired by Ridley Scott's 1979 sci-fi horror classic, and my favourite film, Alien. In that film, Tom Skerritt, playing the Nostromo's Captain Dallas, was the film's most well-known actor at that time, in a position of authority and seemingly in control of the situation. Killing off characters like this therefore provides a major subversion of expectations. The long speech Franklin gives before he is attacked was written to sound deliberately pompous, so that, when the character is dispatched, as well as being surprising for the audience, the scene is also a wink and nod to them, saying, "We know what you came here to see." Although the CGI for the breaching shark doesn't hold up to close scrutiny, it's a fascinating sequence to watch in slow motion to understand just how it was put together. The shot of Sam being pulled under was achieved by pulling him backwards into the water with cables. Franklin's death is still an effective scare 25 years later, and one of the film's most memorable sequences. Originally, this death sequence was to be achieved practically, with an animatronic shark, much like the loss of Jim's arm and the later attack on Jan in the elevator shaft. Unfortunately, the design of this particular set, which was built cantilevered above a 40-foot deep tank, made it too dangerous for the animatronic shark to practically jump up from the water below. For all the criticism that can be levelled at the CGI used for the shark grabbing Samuel L. Jackson, the subsequent computer-generated underwater shot, where a Gen 1 shark bites off the top half of Franklin as the Gen 2 casually devours him, is one of the best of the film. The film's elevator shaft set was another set that was constructed on stage 2, where it was built to a height of approximately 40 feet before being extended digitally to a height of 150 feet. The 6 days of shooting on this set proved to be some of the most arduous. A camera rig was hung in the centre of the shaft, where it was capable of moving vertically, with remote cameras capable of shooting all of the actors as they scaled the elevator shaft's ladder. Burning pieces of debris were then dropped past the actors by stagehands stationed above. The film's ladder sequence, which was a deliberate callback to Harlin's 1993 film, Cliffhanger, was achieved using wires that were then digitally removed from the scene. The sequence where the shark bites and lifts Jan out of the water was shot dozens of times, in part to ensure that Jacqueline McKenzie was confident in her safety when acting inside the animatronic shark's jaws. This was one of the scenes where digital blood was added to the water in post-production, as using fake blood could ruin the whole tank of water for a day, meaning that the tank would have to be emptied, cleaned and refilled. Renny Harlin relayed an unusual on-set occurrence that took place during filming, as Rosarito experienced a mass invasion of crickets. Because of this, the crew had to subsequently re-record much of the film's dialogue to eliminate the crickets' loud chirping noises. Diving back into the now submerged wet lab in an attempt to drain water from a stairway to gain access to the surface, Skogs is next on the menu. The Gen 2 shark clearly chooses to spare Carter in this scene, suggesting that the sharks are deliberately driving the humans to further flood the facility. Meanwhile, Susan returns to her now flooded sleeping quarters in order to retrieve her research, ensuring that her colleagues haven't perished in vain. Following a fake-out scare where Susan mistakes a floating anatomical shark model for the real thing, the second Gen 1 shark launches an attack on its creator. Different versions of this scene were considered, including having Susan use a spear to dispatch the shark. Saffron Burrows often receives criticism for her performance as Susan in Deep Blue Sea. If anything, it's quite cruel that the test screen audience viewed her as a villain when she is the most emotionally driven of the film's characters. Her pursuit to defeat Alzheimer's motivated by the loss of her father. Perhaps it is her cold and detached performance that alienated the film's viewers, but in my opinion it isn't the terrible performance that some claim it to be. Although it is commendable that the film makes the facility's administrator a driven, capable, educated woman, it does go some way to undermine this when she strips down to her underwear in order to survive the shark attack in this scene. The film's tenuous excuse for this is that she needs to stand on her wetsuit as an insulator, protecting her as she wields a weaponized electrical cable. Whether that, and the wooden shelves she's standing on, will do anything to save her life is up for debate, but it's probably best not to dwell too deeply on this nonsense. Of course, the real reason is that this is a B-movie, aimed at teens, so for better or worse, it isn't a shame to crib from the sleazier side of the slasher film playbook. According to Renny Harlin in the film's commentary track, an unnamed studio executive was responsible for this decision. This scene was actually one of the film's first to be shot, at a time when the computer programming for the animatronic shark was still being finalised. As the shark was sitting in McAllister's room, a serious accident was narrowly avoided when the animatronic leapt up without warning, smashing its way through the set's timber ceiling. As a result of this incident, going forward it was ensured that the computer program had fail-safes and locking mechanisms to protect the actors for the rest of the shoot. Although she survives the attack and slays the last Gen 1 shark, this does cost her her research. One of the team's least favourite sets was the emergency escape room, used towards the film's conclusion. This set was built on a hydraulic platform on a set that was 30 feet deep. The flooding of the set was achieved both by lowering the set into the water and by blasting water from hoses above. As this scene was shot in October, the water was extremely cold, so it is no surprise that you can see the actors shivering during the sequence. Once the room is flooded and the characters escape up towards the surface, the exterior of the hatch was a completely different set. Although the plan to distract the final shark with fire extinguishers is effective initially, Preacher is subsequently attacked by the final shark and only just escapes with his life. Deep Blue Sea is well known for its blend of horror and action-adventure, but perhaps surprisingly, it is also a Christian movie. The film is not subtle with its theological messaging, the aptly nicknamed Preacher reflecting on his love for both the pulpit and alcohol, praying for his salvation when his life is in danger, and even leading the other characters in prayer towards the film's conclusion.
2 sharks down, Lord. 1 demon fish to go. Can I get an amen? Amen. I can't hear you. Come on, let me hear you. Give me an amen.
Of course, Deep Blue Sea has to take this one step further, so Preacher, whilst clamped in the jaws of the Gen 2 shark, weaponises the cross he has been clutching throughout the movie, stabbing the beast in its eye. This action saves his life, freeing him from the shark's maw, but the blood loss he experiences looks to be extreme. Perhaps the effects team didn't receive the memo that LL Cool J was now supposed to survive the film. Speaking of alterations to the fates of its characters, Saffron Burrows' character Susan was initially supposed to be a survivor. After Susan has deliberately sliced her hand to attract the shark away from its escape attempt, it is very clear to see where the film's ending was altered in post-production. The large animatronic Gen 2 shark can clearly be seen swimming the wrong way, toward the fence as Carter is chasing it on the surface, at a time when it is supposed to be moving away from the fence towards Susan. For the film's 20th anniversary in 2019, a petition was started to restore the original ending of the film. As of 2024, it is just shy of 3,500 signatures, and it has even been promoted by Thomas Jane himself. The decision in the theatrical cut to have Susan devoured by her creation means that all of the scientists tampering with the natural order of things die for their sin of trying to play God. The film is clearly heavily inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in that respect. With Susan gone, the shark turns its attention towards Carter. Evading its attack, he clings to the creature's dorsal fin as it speeds around the enclosure, trying to shake him loose. Accompanied by my favourite track from Trevor Rabin's score, the wounded preacher wielding Carter's spear gun spears both the shark and Carter. The shark finally bursts its way free of the facility, but it does so too late, Preacher detonating the spear's explosive charge, slaying the final shark. An exhausted Carter then surfaces and the two reunite, cautiously taking their feet out of the water as a boat approaches with the next day shift crew. Roll credits filled with 90s rap. The film's two survivors, Preacher and Carter, are a cook and a shark wrangler, two of the only characters who aren't directly responsible for genetically tampering with the shark's biology. To the film's credit, it can't simply be divided into a straight battle of good versus evil. Unlike the rogue great white shark in Jaws, which is specifically targeting humans, the mako sharks in Deep Blue Sea are victims of unethical experimentation, simply desiring their freedom, and are driving their human captors in order to achieve that goal. Meanwhile, the unethical scientists have broken the film's fictional Harvard genetics compact, but with noble intentions, to cure Alzheimer's. Even Carter slots into the anti-hero role, being a former smuggler on parole. So that was Deep Blue Sea. Is it a derivative film? Absolutely. Although Renny Harlin wanted to make a big-budget horror movie, the film he directed is certainly more B-movie than blockbuster, but there is no shame in that. Shot on Super 35mm film, it certainly looks the part, and for all of its ridiculousness, it is a fun experience, a film filled full of B-movie charm. On its approximately $82 million budget, the film pulled in approximately $165 million at the box office. No mean feat when you consider some of the box office competition it was up against at the time, including The Blair Witch Project. It also outperformed its most comparable competitor, the crocodile creature feature Lake Placid. For all of its successes, however, originality is not one of this film's strong points. If you were making a list of shark films, the obvious first port of call is Steven Spielberg's Jaws, and its three sequels of rapidly sinking quality would most likely not be too far behind. Deep Blue Sea clearly lifts shots and sequences from all four of these films. Loving homage or plagiarism, that's in the eye of the beholder. A fun nod to the original Jaws is that the license plate which Carter fishes out of the tiger shark's mouth early in the film is almost identical to the plate fished from the tiger shark in the 1975 movie.
A what?
Sportsmen's Paradise is misspelt as Sportsman's Paradise, however. Further references to the Jaws franchise include a shark smashing a glass window causing flooding, a shark killed by an electrical cable, a roaring shark, and the obliteration of the final shark by a large explosion. Additional expository scenes are often left on a film's cutting room floor, and Deep Blue Sea is no exception. The biggest casualty of these lost scenes is the relationship between Jim and Jan. These scenes do an admirable job of fleshing out these two characters, and their absence leaves them unfortunately feeling rather shallow as a consequence. The seeming reason for this decision is tied to Jan's fate. The deleted scenes reveal that Jan is pregnant, a detail that makes her death, being lifted out of the water in the shark's jaws, even more grim. A number of scenes that humanise Susan and help set up the romantic relationship between her and Carter were also cut ahead of the film's release. As the film's test audience had reacted negatively to her character and felt that she was the film's secondary antagonist, these changes were made in an attempt to help support the altered ending and justify her demise. I also have to mention another brief scene that was cut which subtly references the 1979 film The Warriors, the camera focusing on Ada Totoro's lips as she uses the radio.
Stay tuned, boppers. Stay tuned.
Although Deep Blue Sea certainly has its fans, it is somewhat strange that the decision was taken to turn the film into a franchise 19 years after the first film. Rather than receiving cinema releases though, Deep Blue Sea 2 and 3 were both released directly to the home video and streaming market, a decision which often signals the death knell of a franchise. Rather than continue the story, 2018's Deep Blue Sea 2 was a soft reboot of the first film. Although the Alzheimer's cure was substituted with intelligence-enhancing drugs from a pharmaceutical company and the Mako sharks were swapped for bull sharks, the film is little more than an inferior remake on a much smaller budget. Deep Blue Sea 3, released in 2020, was a step up however, and even gives audiences one particularly memorable death scene which is very reminiscent of the unintentional humour of the first film. It still pales in comparison with the original film however, even though its computer-generated sharks are an improvement thanks to advancing technology. Renny Harlin was very proud of Deep Blue Sea's CGI at the time, challenging viewers to identify which sharks were animatronic and which sharks were computer-generated, suggesting that they were indistinguishable from the real thing. Looking at the film now, it is very easy to tell the difference, but in context, the film was pushing the limits of the technology of the time with some truly remarkable results. In 1993, Jurassic Park had shown the film world what could be achieved digitally, and though it would be unfair to directly compare that big-budget blockbuster with Deep Blue Sea, a new avenue of filmmaking was clearly being explored. Having grown up seeing these effects, despite them now seeming dated, there is something about late 1990s CGI that has a nostalgic quality and still retains its character today. When I started writing this podcast episode, it wasn't supposed to be a deep dive, but a breezy episode exploring a film that is by no means a masterpiece, but which has given me a lot of fun over the years. Unintentionally, I've spent a lot more time than I'd anticipated with it, learning about the shark animatronics, the sets, and trying to unpick some of the rumours surrounding the film. Ultimately, that has made me appreciate Deep Blue Sea even more than I did, meaning that I would rate it as a 7 out of 10 film. Deep Blue Sea is often described as the second best shark movie behind You Know What, a statement that always felt like it was being damned with faint praise. In my mind, however, Renny Harlin and his team struck the perfect balance, ensuring that Deep Blue Sea stands apart from the many inferior Jaws imitators out there.
And what you've done is taken God's oldest killing machine and given it will and desire. What you've done is knocked us all the way to the bottom of the goddamn food chain. It's not a great leap forward in my book.
With that said, I'm very much looking forward to seeing Tommy Wiseau's Big Shark get a UK release. If it ends up being The Room meets Jaws, Deep Blue Sea might be in danger of being pushed down my ranking.
Wow, a huge charge!
Hopefully you enjoyed this 9th episode of Sitting Through the Credits, celebrating Deep Blue Sea's 25th anniversary. Whilst I was working on this episode, I also subjected my friends, Thomas and Brian, to a movie trivia quiz. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please check out their podcast, Cynic Critique, for that and even more film-related goodness. Links can be found in the description below, along with links to my socials if you'd like to stay up to date with my current podcast project. I'm looking forward to bringing more film reviews to you in the near future. Thank you for listening.
I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished.
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard.
Racing, it's life.
What's the boogeyman?
Any further resistance will be dealt with in the same way.
As a matter of fact, it was.
End of story.